Welcome to West Film, where every movie has a story worth telling. From heart-pounding action to twisty mysteries and dramas that stick with you, we dig into the plot, the characters, and the moments that make each film worth your time. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's jump into today's movie. This is West Film. Your story starts here. As Spencer walks away, the strange old man who runs the freak house stops him with a rambling, unsettling speech about just how harsh the world can be. Spencer isn't sure whether to feel frightened or just baffled. Back at school, Bethany is supposed to be focused on a test, but she's far more preoccupied with her phone, anxiously watching a post that isn't getting the attention she wants. She's so absorbed that she doesn't realize she's disrupting the whole class until her teacher catches her and sends her to detention. Meanwhile, in gym class, Martha keeps to herself and refuses to join in. When her teacher tries to coax her into participating, she fires back with an insult that cuts down both him and his profession, earning her a detention slip of her own. Not long after, Spencer and Fridge are called into the principal's office. The essay Spencer ghost wrote for Fridge turns out to be recycled from an old assignment, and the teacher caught on. Spencer tries to shoulder the blame alone, but it doesn't work. Both boys land in detention. Once there, Fridge lashes out, blaming Spencer for wrecking everything, while Spencer shoots back that Fridge never gives him any credit. The detention supervisor opens with a speech about self-reflection, reminding them that they only get one life and that moments like this are meant to make them think about who they are and who they want to become. Their punishment: pull every last staple out of a mountain of old magazines before anyone's allowed to leave. Martha's the only one who actually gets to work. Bethany ignores the task completely and stays glued to her phone, while Spencer and Fridge poke around the cluttered room instead of working. That's when they stumble on an old video game console and plug it into the TV. The game is called Jumanji, and something about it feels wrong from the start. Spencer and Fridge pick their characters, with Spencer shrugging that it probably doesn't matter which one they choose. Bethany grabs a controller just to get out of doing actual work, and Martha, after some prodding, reluctantly joins in. The second the game boots up, the room shakes with the pounding rhythm of drums. The console sparks and glows an eerie green. Spencer yanks the cord from the wall, but it's already too late. He's yanked into the screen. The others scream as, one after another, they're sucked in too. Spencer lands hard in a sprawling desert, now inhabiting the powerful frame of Dr. Smolder Bravestone. Franklin Mouse Finbar appears next to him, followed by the tough, athletic Ruby Roundhouse, and finally the bookish, awkward Professor Sheldon Oberon. It doesn't take long for the horrifying truth to hit them. They haven't just entered the game here, they've become the characters. Fridge realizes he's now inhabiting Mouse Finbar. Martha has turned into the fearless fighter Ruby Roundhouse. And Bethany, to her utter horror, is stuck as an overweight, middle-aged scientist named Professor Sheldon Oberon. The four of them stand frozen, trying to process what just happened with all the composure four terrified teenagers can muster. Bethany insists this must be a dream, or maybe a coma. The others aren't convinced either, and she's still arguing the point when a hippopotamus creeps up behind her and crushes her instantly in its jaws. Moments later, she drops out of the sky, landing safely on the ground, completely unharmed. That's when the reality of their situation, or whatever this reality actually is, starts to sink in. Before they can process it further, the hippo comes back, angrier than before, and the group takes off running in a full panic. A jeep pulls up beside them, and they pile in without a second thought. The driver, Nigel, seems to already know exactly who they are, or at least who their avatars are supposed to be. He greets them warmly and explains that Jumanji desperately needs their help. The land is cursed, and they're the only ones who can save it. But when they press him with questions, his answers come out stiff and repetitive. That's when Spencer figures it out: Nigel isn't a real person. He's an NPC, programmed with a limited set of lines. Nigel launches into a flashback, Long ago, Dr. Bravestone's former partner, Professor Russell Van Pelt, became obsessed with finding Jumanji's sacred jewel. When he finally pried it loose from atop a jaguar's statue, a dark force took hold of him, giving him control over the land and everything in it. The jungle fell under a curse soon after. Nigel managed to steal the jewel away, but he was never able to return it himself, for the task now falls to the group. Before driving off, Nigel recites a cryptic rhyme: return the jewel, lift the curse, and if they want to leave, they must save Jumanji and say its name aloud. Then he kicks them out of the jeep and disappears, leaving them alone and thoroughly confused. Left to themselves, the group has to reckon with who they've become. Spencer, normally anxious and unsure, is now a fearless hero. Fridge, a gifted athlete in real life, is stuck in a tiny body. Martha, shy and withdrawn, now looks like a confident action star. And Bethany, who cares deeply about appearances, is trapped in a body she despises. It's uncomfortable, to say the least, but Spencer is confident he can handle this. He plays video games all the time. This is basically his territory. He convinces the others that if they follow the rules, return the jewel, and beat the game, they'll make it home. Their first stop is the bazaar. When they pull out the map, they discover only Bethany, or rather, Professor Obrona, can actually read it. That's also when they realize each of them has a unique skill set. Spencer has superhuman strength and courage. Ruby is a trained fighter. Mouse is a zoologist who can lug enormous amounts of gear. And Bethany is the brains of the operation. She starts navigating Fatima until the roar of engines interrupts. A swarm of armed men on motorcycles comes barreling toward them, guns blazing and explosives flying. The group bolts. Bullets and rocket blasts fill the air. Spencer sprints with superhuman speed. Martha bounds effortlessly through the trees, and Bethany somehow keeps pace. Fridge, though, struggles badly on his short legs, so Spencer ends up carrying him as they dash into the jungle. They break out of the tree line and find themselves at the edge of a cliff overlooking a river. With no other choice, all four jump. They hit the water hard and scramble to the riverbank, where Martha reveals she's been shot to and drops dead. Seconds later, she's back, alive again, and the group realizes the truth. Each of them has 3 lives. Bethany already burned one on the hippo, and Martha just used one of her own. Lose all 3, and it's game over for good. Elsewhere, Van Pelt learns that his prisoners have escaped and, furious, sends even more hunters and creatures after them. As the group pushes on toward the bazaar, the tension between them builds. Bethany and Martha start to bond, while Spencer and Fridge keep clashing. Fridge blaming Spencer for the mess they're in, Spencer accusing Fridge of abandoning their friendship long before any of this started. The fight boils over, and Fridge shoves Spencer off a cliff, killing him. When Spencer comes back, the message finally lands. Infighting isn't an option. If they don't work as a team, none of them are getting out alive. At the bazaar, they find a clue that leads them to a room guarded by a deadly viper coiled around the missing piece of their map. Working together, they distract the snake and grab what they need, only to find the prize is underwhelming: a small elephant statue and yet another riddle. Before they can even begin to solve it, Van Pelt's men close in from every direction. The group fights back and, for a moment, it almost looks like they'll break free, but they're quickly overwhelmed and surrounded. Just as things look hopeless, a smoke bomb detonates, throwing the area into chaos. A cloaked figure appears out of nowhere and leads them through hidden tunnels beneath the market and into the sewers below. Their rescuer introduces himself as Jefferson Seaplane McDonough. He's also trapped in the game, he explains, and has been hiding out in a makeshift shelter for what feels like months, having already died twice and grown too afraid to push forward alone. Bethany quickly puts it together: Seaplane isn't just some random survivor, he's the piece of the puzzle they've been missing. With him on the team, Finishing the game suddenly seems possible. Their next obstacle is a guarded hangar. Two armed men stand between the group and the helicopter they need to make their escape. They decide to send Martha in as a distraction, with Bethany coaching her from a distance on how to use charm to throw the guards off balance. It's a long shot, but they're out of better ideas. As Martha approaches, Seaplane lets slip a few phrases that sound wildly out of date here, and the truth comes out. He's actually Alex Freak, the teenager who disappeared decades earlier after discovering the game. While they process this revelation, Spencer quietly confesses to Fridge that he has feelings for Martha. Fridge urges him to say something, but Spencer immediately loses his nerve. Meanwhile, at the hangar, Martha's flirting attempt falls flat, but she pivots instantly, switching from charm to combat. It turns out one of her hidden talents is fighting that doubles as dance, and with a cheesy love song blaring from the guard's radio, she makes quick work of them. The team commandeers the helicopter and takes off, but the escape is anything but smooth. To shake their pursuers, they're forced to fly through a narrow canyon packed with a stampede of furious rhinos. The animals slam into the chopper, rattling it violently, and in the chaos Fridge drops the sacred jewel. With no other choice, they turn back to retrieve it. Spencer throws Fridge out of the helicopter to draw the rhinos away. Fridge is instantly trampled, burning through one of his livers while Spencer swoops in and grabs the jewel. When Fridge reappears mid-fall, Spencer manages to catch him just before he hits the ground. Somehow, they make it through the canyon and clear the level. Alex is elated until a mosquito bite triggers one of his character's weaknesses. Without a moment's hesitation, Bethany gives up one of her own lives to save him, a clear sign of how much she's changed. In a rare quiet moment, the group finally catches its breath. Bethany and Alex grow closer, and Spencer finally works up the courage to tell Martha how he feels. They share an awkward, sincere first kiss. That night, the group reaches its final destination, the towering Jaguar statue where the jewel must be returned. There's a clear path leading straight to it, but Spencer decides to cut through the trees instead, only to spot a squirrel, panic, fall, and lose another life. It's obvious now that the only way forward is together. Fridge takes charge and lays out a plan. He, Alex, and Bethany will distract Van Pelt and his army while Spencer makes a run for the statue. The plan nearly collapses when Van Pelt captures Bethany and holds a blade to her throat, demanding the jewel. Thinking on his feet, Fridge uses his zoology skills to summon an elephant, creating just enough chaos for Bethany to slip away. The final stretch begins. Spencer races up the mountainside on a motorcycle toward the statue while Bethany, cornered elsewhere, finds herself trapped in a pit of venomous cobras. With no way out, she lets herself get bitten, sacrificing her final life. She vanishes and reappears high in the sky, and as she falls, she hurls the jewel towards Spencer. He catches it in midair, lands atop the Jaguar statue, and slams the jewel back into place. With everything riding on this moment, he shouts the game's name, Jumanji. The curse breaks instantly, and the land transforms back into something peaceful. The five of them stand together, still stunned that they actually pulled it off. Nigel reappears in his jeep, congratulates them, and offers to send them home. Everyone agrees right away except Spencer, who's afraid of going back to being his old, insecure self. With some encouragement from Bethany, he finally comes around. Back in the real world, the four friends return to detention, hardly able to believe the whole ordeal is over. But Alex is nowhere to be found. They rush to the freak house and discover it's been fully restored, and inside, Alex is there, now fully grown. He explains that he was sent back to the exact night he first entered the game and has been waiting there ever since. The group can't help but laugh at how everything turned out. All of them have changed for the better. Spencer is braver, Fridge cares about more than just sports now, Martha no longer feels so alone, and Bethany has learned to think about people other than herself. To make sure no one else ever gets trapped the way they were, the four friends take the console into an alley and smash it to pieces for good. Analysis: here's something you might not expect. One of the more surprisingly successful adventure movies of the last decade started life as a remake nobody actually wanted. When Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle was first announced, plenty of people rolled their eyes. So a reboot of a beloved classic, released decades later, with a totally different tone. On paper, it had all the makings of a disappointment. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of retreading the original, the film rewrote its own rules. Literally, Jumanji stopped being a cursed board game and became a video game instead, complete with avatars, stats, weaknesses, and extra lives. That one creative swing changed everything. What makes this movie stand out isn't just the action or the jokers, it's how it uses comedy to dig into identity, insecurity, and self-acceptance, all while never losing its brisk pace. This isn't simply a jungle romp. It's a story about being trapped in someone else's body, forced to confront who you really are, and discovering that your so-called flaws might actually be your biggest strengths. In this breakdown, we'll look at how Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle defied low expectations, reinvented a beloved classic, and turned a risky reboot into a genuine crowd pleaser without losing what made the original Jumanji special. So settle in now, because once those drums start beating, there's no turning back. Released in 2017, Welcome to the Jungle set out with a bold goal: take a familiar name and completely rebuild how it functions for a modern audience. This time around, Jumanji isn't a board game unleashing chaos into the real world. It's a forgotten video game buried in time, just waiting for someone to hit start. And once they do, there's no pause button. The film blends adventure, comedy, fantasy, and action, but never lets any single genre dominate the others. The jungle setting feels dangerous, unpredictable, and vividly alive, filled with traps, wild creatures, and game-like rules that feel instantly familiar to anyone who's ever picked up a controller. At its core, the setup is simple. Four ordinary teenagers get pulled into Jumanji and forced to survive as characters who are nothing like their real selves. Each avatar comes loaded with specific strengths and very particular weaknesses. To escape, they have to beat the game. To beat the game, they have to work together. And to work together, they have to face parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. That structure gives the film plenty of room to be funny, fast-moving, and self-aware while still keeping the stakes real. Every life matters, every decision counts, and every mistake has consequences. What makes this version of Jumanji work is that it never tries to be bigger or darker than it needs to be. Instead, it zeroes in on fun, clarity, and character, building a foundation for an adventure that's easy to enjoy but smarter than it first appears. On the surface, Welcome to the Jungle looks like a fairly straightforward adventure comedy, but that's only half the story. Sure, it delivers jungle chases, big action beats, and plenty of laughs. But underneath all that spectacle, the film is quietly doing something more clever. It treats genre as a tool rather than a crutch. At its heart, this is a character-driven comedy dressed up in adventure clothing. The jokes don't just come from wacky situations, they come from clashes of identity, from people stuck in bodies that don't match who they think they are. Self-acceptance sits at the center of the story. Every character walks into the game carrying insecurities about how they look, where they stand socially, how smart they are, or how confident they feel. Jumanji doesn't erase those insecurities, it exaggerates them, and in doing so turns the comedy into something closer to a mirror. There's also a strong thread about identity versus perception. Strength doesn't always look powerful, confidence doesn't always come from muscle, and heroism has less to do with dominance than with growth. Tonally, The film stays light and accessible without ever feeling hollow. It knows exactly who it's for: younger viewers looking for fun and energy, and adults who'll find something relatable buried underneath the laughs. That balance is the key to why it works. It doesn't talk down to its audience, and it doesn't overcomplicate its message. It just lets the jungle adventure entertain you while gently reminding you that the person you're trying to become might already be inside you. The story kicks off in the real world with 4 high schoolers who couldn't be more different, to different social circles, different insecurities, nothing in common except one thing: detention. While cleaning out an old storage room, they discover a forgotten video game console. No instructions, no warning label, just a single word glowing on the screen: Jumanji. The moment they start playing, reality disappears, and the teens are yanked into a massive, dangerous jungle governed by video game logic. But the real shock isn't the setting, it's who they've become. Each of them is now trapped inside an avatar that's essentially the opposite of their real-life self. The shy kid becomes a fearless action hero. The confident athlete becomes small and vulnerable. Strength, intelligence, and charisma get shuffled in ways none of them expected. As they push deeper into the jungle, the stakes become clear fast. This isn't a game you can just quit. Death has real consequences. Lives are limited, and survival depends on understanding both the rules of the world and the people you're stuck with. Every obstacle draws the group closer together. What starts as panic slowly becomes strategy. What begins as mockery turns into respect. What feels like punishment becomes a real test of character. The deeper they go, the more the game forces them to confront who they actually are, not the roles they play at school, but who they become once status, labels, and comfort are stripped away. By the time they figure out how to win, they've already changed. Escaping the jungle stops being just about completing a mission. It becomes about proving they've grown enough to earn a second chance. By the time the story reaches its climax, one thing is obvious: Jumanji was never really about winning a game. The final showdown isn't just a test of strength or skill, it's a test of everything the characters have learned since they arrived. Every failure, every lost life, every moment of doubt has been building toward this. On the surface, what happens is simple: the mission gets completed, the curse lifts, and balance returns to Jumanji. But the deeper meaning runs further. Each character succeeds not by becoming someone else, but by finally accepting who they already were. The confidence they borrowed from their avatars doesn't disappear, it becomes something internal. The courage, empathy, and self-belief they found inside the game carry over into their real lives. The most important beat isn't the victory, it's the choice to let the game go. By destroying Jumanji, the characters choose growth over escape. They turn down the idea of hiding behind a fantasy version of themselves and instead accept the responsibility of living as changed people in the real world. Symbolically, the ending makes its point clear: you don't beat Jumanji by conquering it, you beat it by outgrowing it. There's also a quiet openness to how it all wraps up. The jungle may be gone, but its influence lingers. The characters return to their ordinary lives not as heroes, but as better versions of themselves, more honest, more confident, more connected. And that's why the ending lands, because when the drums finally stop, the real victory isn't survival, it's transformation. One of the smartest things this film does is hide its meaning in plain sight. Almost every rule of the game doubles as a metaphor. Take the character stat screens as strength, speed, courage, weaknesses. These aren't just gameplay mechanics, they're exaggerated reflections of who these characters are underneath. What looks like power is often insecurity in disguise, and what looks like weakness is usually untapped potential. Even the limited lives system carries weight. Each death isn't just a reset, it's a reminder that recklessness has consequences. The film quietly teaches growth through failure rather than success. The jungle itself works as a symbol to unpredictable, hostile, constantly shifting. Much like adolescence, you can't control it, you can only adapt. And the deeper the characters go, the more the environment strips away their social masks and comfort zones, forcing honesty. There are subtle nods to the original film scattered throughout, familiar warning signs, thematic echoes, narrative parallels, are not that to copy the past, but to acknowledge it. The real danger here isn't nostalgia, it's stagnation. Even the non-playable characters behave like classic video game NPCs, repeating dialogue and waiting for player input, existing only to nudge the story forward. It's played for laughs, but it reinforces the idea that this world doesn't truly come alive until the characters grow within it. The biggest hidden truth of all, Jumanji doesn't change people, it reveals them. Once you notice that, the movie stops feeling like just an adventure and starts feeling personal. What makes Welcome to the Jungle even more interesting is what happened behind the scenes. This movie wasn't supposed to be a hit. Early expectations were modest, with many assuming it would coast on nostalgia and fade quickly. Instead, a handful of smart creative decisions completely changed its trajectory. One of the biggest was casting against type. The humor didn't come from actors playing themselves, but from deliberate role reversals. The cast studied teenage mannerisms, speech patterns, and body language to sell the idea of real teenagers trapped in unfamiliar adult bodies. A lot of the comedy was also given room to breathe, with several scenes built around loose improvisation rather than tightly scripted beats, which is part of why so many jokes feel spontaneous instead of forced. Physically, the shoot demanded more than the finished film lets own. Despite the comedic tone, the cast went through stunt training and endurance prep to sell the action convincingly within the game's internal logic. Some ideas never made the final cut. Early drafts explored darker consequences for failure inside the game, but the filmmakers ultimately leaned into clarity and fun over heaviness, keeping things accessible without losing the stakes. Behind the scenes, the biggest risk turned into the film's greatest strength, trusting the concept enough to lean fully into the game mechanics instead of apologizing for them. That confidence is exactly what audiences responded to. Any film that revives a legacy title invites comparison, and Welcome to the Jungle is no exception. The most obvious point of comparison is the 1995 original, which treated the game as something closer to a horror-adjacent force, chaotic, mysterious, uncontrollable, with danger spilling out into the real world and turning ordinary spaces into battlegrounds. Welcome to the Jungle flips that entirely. Instead of chaos entering our world, the characters willingly step into chaos themselves. Tonally, the difference is stark. The original leans darker and more unpredictable. The 2017 film leans self-aware, comedic, and character-driven. It's less about fear and more about growth. Neither approach is wronger, they're just built for different generations. The movie also sits alongside other trapped inside a game stories, but where many of those lean purely on spectacle or survival, Welcome to the Jungle invests its energy in identity-driven storytelling. The game isn't just an obstacle to beat, it's something to learn from. Compared to other modern reboots, this one stands out by refusing to simply recreate iconic moments shot for shot. Instead, it updates the premise to match how audiences actually engage with games today. Where it falls a bit short is in mystery. The world of Jumanji feels more explained, more structured, and less eerie than it did in 1995. But that trade-off buys tighter pacing, clearer rules, and sharper comedic timing. In the end, Welcome to the Jungle doesn't replace the original, it reinterprets it, and that distinction is exactly why the comparison works in its favor. When the film hit theaters, the reaction surprised almost everyone. Audiences walked in skeptical. Reboots of childhood favorites rarely inspire much confidence here, but word of mouth spread fast, and the praise wasn't ironic. People were genuinely having a good time. Viewers responded strongly to the cast's chemistry, the humor, and the surprisingly heartfelt character arcs. For a lot of people, The film exceeded expectations simply by understanding exactly what it wanted to be. It wasn't chasing prestige, it was chasing entertainment with purpose. Critics were more divided. Many praised its energy and the way it reinvented the concept, while others pointed to familiar story beats and a fairly predictable structure. But even among the mixed reviews, one point kept coming up again and again: the movie was far better than it had any right to be. Over time, the conversation around it shifted. What once looked like a risky reboot started to feel like a blueprint for how legacy titles should evolve. The film built a reputation not as a replacement for the original, but as a successful reimagining that respected its roots without being chained to them. Is it overrated? Not really. Underrated? Maybe. The truth is that Welcome to the Jungle occupies that rare middle ground, a film that never aimed to be iconic but became memorable anyway by being honest, fun, and self-aware. And sometimes that's the hardest balance of all to strike. So where does the film ultimately land? At its best, it succeeds because it understands its own identity. It doesn't try to outdo the original, and it doesn't chase darker tones or forced nostalgia. Instead, it commits fully to being fun, character-driven, and surprisingly thoughtful. Its greatest strength is the ensemble. The cast bounces off each other with an energy and timing that elevates even the most familiar story beats. The humor lands because it's rooted in personality rather than just punchlines, and the game world concept gives the story a clear structure without boxing in the creativity. That said, it isn't flawless. The plot follows a fairly recognizable path, and the villain lacks the depth of the hero's arcs. But these weaknesses never derail the experience here. They just serve as a reminder that this movie prioritizes momentum over complexity. So who's this for? If you enjoy adventure films that don't take themselves too seriously, appreciate character growth wrapped in comedy, or are a skeptical reboot watcher open to being pleasantly surprised, this one is worth your time. Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle isn't a masterpiece, and it doesn't need to be. It's a confident, entertaining reinvention that proves the simple point: when you respect the spirit of a story instead of just copying it, even the riskiest reboot can pay off. And that's a game worth playing. Reviews round up. I'll admit, I went in with pretty low expectations. The marketing hadn't fully won me over, and I worried the movie might lean into juvenile humor instead of delivering something genuinely entertaining. I also wasn't sold on the casting. Still, as someone trying to catch as many 2017 releases as possibly and as a fan of both light escapist entertainment and the original Robin Williams classic, I decided to give it a shot with tempered anticipation. It's certainly not a cinematic masterpiece, but the film clearly set out to be slick, energetic escapism, and it delivers on that front. I still hold the original in high regard, but beyond sharing a title and basic premise, this feels like its own thing and deserves to be judged that way. I get why it wouldn't click for everyone, though I've seen more positive reactions than negative ones overall. The weakest stretch is the opening act set in the real world. Of the first 20 minutes drag, functioning mostly as setup without much momentum, and the writing feels a little awkward before the performances click into place. Once the story shifts into the game world, though, it finds its rhythm. Most of the cast fares well from there. Nick Jonas, unfortunately, comes across flat and forgettable. Kevin Hart dials back his usual routine somewhat, but his fast-talking energy still wears thin at times, even if he lands some genuinely funny moments. So it's the kind of style you either love or don't. Where the film really shines is in pure entertainment value. Despite a nearly 2-hour runtime, the pacing picks up dramatically once the characters enter Jumanji, and time flies from there. The plot is predictable and the outcomes rarely in doubt, but the vibrant energy, adventurous set pieces, and constant sense of playful danger more than make up for it. The script balances humor with unexpected warmth, and while Hart's language gets a little coarse at times, it never tips into obnoxious territory. The visual effects impress. The jungle world feels colorful and immersive, and the direction stays confident and lively throughout. The score is upbeat and memorable, and the ending lands with more heart than expected. Longtime fans might catch a subtle nod to Robin Williams and Alan Parrish if they're paying close attention. Dwayne Johnson delivers exactly what you'd expect: a charisma, intensity, star power. It's familiar territory for him, but he pulls it off well. Karen Gillan more than keeps pace with her co-stars, bringing charm, confidence, and comedic timing to her role. Her scene learning to flirt and dance is a genuine highlight. Bobby Cannavale makes for a suitably intimidating villain, though the script doesn't give him much to work with. And then there's Jack Black, who absolutely steals the movie. His comedic timing is razor sharp. His best material comes in rapid bursts, and this might be his strongest performance since School of Rock. The character dynamics stand out as a major highlight. 4 very different teens land in detention. Spencer gets caught doing homework for his former friend Fridge, Bethany's glued to her phone during a test, and Martha lashes out at her teacher. While cleaning out a basement storage room, they find an old console labeled Jumanji, and once it powers on, they're pulled into the game and assigned avatars that are the polar opposite of who they are in real life. Spencer becomes the muscle-bound Dr. Smolder Bravestone, Fridge shrinks into a pint-sized zoologist, Bethany finds herself stuck in the body of a middle-aged male professor, and Martha transforms into a fierce, agile fighter. The result is a lot of fun. The laughs come frequently, and the chemistry among the 4 leads is excellent. Johnson and Hart clearly have comedic synergy. Jack Black is hilarious playing against gender expectations, and Gillan proves she's got sharp comic instincts hiding beneath the action hero exterior. The one real weak link is Nick Jonas, whose limited role feels stiff and underwhelming. A surprise late film cameo might have elevated his part, but it's a minor complaint in an otherwise enjoyable film. One especially grating character early on is the self-absorbed, phone-obsessed teen played before the transformation, as she's intentionally irritating, and those first few minutes are a bit of a slog, though thankfully brief once she becomes Jack Black's avatar. The rest of the teens come across as immature but tolerable rather than unbearable. As a follow-up arriving more than 2 decades after the 1995 original, the film wisely avoids leaning too heavily on nostalgia. With only a handful of callbacks, it feels more like a fresh start than a retread. Watching the characters end up in bodies that are the exact opposite of their real selves adds a layer of poetic justice here, especially when the popular girl has to grapple with being someone entirely different. That moment, paired with Jack Black's horrified reaction to seeing himself in the mirror, is worth the price of admission on its own. Overall, Welcome to the Jungle delivers exactly what it promises: an energetic, funny, family-friendly adventure that doesn't take itself too seriously, and that's precisely what makes it work. This time, the story trades suburban chaos for full-blown jungle mayhem, giving it a distinctly different flavor. Watching grown actors convincingly channel awkward teenagers is half the fun, especially as Jack Black's character meets an absurd fate involving a hippo, learns some questionable life lessons, and delivers a genuinely funny commentary on social media obsession and toxic popularity culture. The film doesn't ask for deep analyses. Its strengths are pace, humor, and pure energy. It doesn't quite recapture the originality of the first film, but it's lively, entertaining, and packed with memorable moments. Welcome to the Jungle works as both a loose sequel and a modern reimagining of the 1995 classic. There's a subtle thread connecting it back to Robin Williams's character, but the film confidently stands on its own. Where the original was known for its then groundbreaking CGI stampede, this one shows just how far visual effects have come. Here everything looks smoother, bigger, more immersive. The setup feels almost like a modern Breakfast Club. 4 very different students land in detention and stumble on an old console hidden away at school. Inside is Jumanji, now reimagined as a multiplayer video game. Once they hit play, they're pulled into a world where each becomes an avatar that's nothing like their real self. Spencer, the shy gamer, transforms into the fearless Dr. Smolder Bravestone. Dwayne Johnson, Fridge, the confident football star, shrinks down into Bravestone's compact sidekick. Zoologist Franklin Mouse Finbar, Kevin Hart, complete with an inconvenient weakness for cake. Bethany, the self-absorbed social media queen, ends up as the awkward, overweight cartographer Professor Sheldon Oberon, while Martha, intelligent but introverted, becomes the fierce and athletic Ruby Roundhouse. Together they have to complete the game's quest, returning a stolen artifact while facing down dangerous creatures, hostile villains, and classic video game-style obstacles. The film leans hard into gaming tropes of extra lives, character strengths and weaknesses, but uses them cleverly for both comedy and tension. I never thought the original Jumanji quite nailed the balance between fantasy and humor. It always felt a little clunky to me. This version benefits enormously from the chemistry between Johnson and Hart, who clearly enjoy playing off each other. Director Jake Kasdan delivers more than a lazy cash grab reboot. He injects real character development, especially through Spencer and Martha's growing confidence and connection. There's even a surprisingly thoughtful moment where Bravestone wonders aloud whether staying in the game might actually be preferable to going home. As someone who loved the original growing up, I even saw it twice in theater, so I initially felt a sequel or reboot was unnecessary. But after watching the trailers, my curiosity got the better of me. The film opens in 1996, when a teenager named Alex discovers the Jumanji board game, only for it to mysteriously morph into a video game cartridge that traps him inside. Decades later, the cycle repeats with a new group of students, neatly tying the past to the present. Overall, Welcome to the Jungle may not top its predecessor, but it's fast-paced, funny, and surprisingly heartfelt. It understands what made the original memorable while updating it for a new generation, and that's no small feat. Welcome to the Jungle takes the classic premise and flips it for a modern audience, swapping the board game for a video game while keeping the sense of adventure intact. The story follows four very different high schoolers who wind up in detention together. Spencer, smart but socially awkward Fridge, his athletic best friend who's struggling academically Bethany, a self-absorbed social media addict, and Martha, intelligent but cynical and openly disdainful of gym class. While cleaning out an old classroom, they find a dusty console with a cartridge simply labeled Jumanji. Once they power it on and pick their characters, everything changes, so they're pulled straight into the game and dropped into a dangerous jungle world as their chosen avatars. Spencer becomes the powerful, fearless Dr. Smolder Bravestone. Fridge ends up as the pint-sized zoologist Mouse Finbar. Bethany is horrified to find herself as the middle-aged Professor Sheldon Oberon, and Martha emerges as the highly skilled fighter Ruby Roundhouse. Each avatar comes with its own strengths, weaknesses, and a crucially limited number of lives. To escape, the group has to survive a series of increasingly dangerous challenges and return a precious gem, the Jaguar's Eye, to its rightful place. Along the way, teamwork becomes essential as they contend with deadly wildlife, hostile enemies, and the relentless hunt of Van Pelt and his forces. Lives are lost one by one through bad luck, poor choices, and surprise attacks, raising the stakes as the story progresses. Midway through, the group meets a fifth player, Alex, an experienced gamer who's been trapped inside Jumanji for decades. His avatar, pilot Jefferson Seaplane McDonough, has survived alone by hiding out in a treehouse built by an earlier player. With only one life left, Alex is stunned to learn how much time has passed back home. The group bonds with him quickly and promises to help him finally escape. During a risky helicopter mission to reach the Jaguar's statue, disaster nearly strikes when Alex loses his final life to what seems like a minor injury, but Bethany saves him with CPR, unknowingly sacrificing one of her own lives in the process. It's a key turning point that shows just how much the characters have grown. The final showdown brings all 5 players together, combining their abilities to outsmart Van Pelt and his guards. Through clever distractions and genuine teamwork, they return the jewel, call out the game's name, and bring the whole ordeal to a close. The villains are defeated, the jungle collapses around them, and the players are sent back to the real world. Back at school, things have changed in unexpected ways. Alex is no longer among the missing. He reappears as an adult, having been returned to the past where history unfolded differently. He's now happily married with a daughter named Bethany, named in honor of the girl who saved his life. The 14s have changed too. Spencer and Fridge patch up their friendship. Martha opens herself up to romance, and Bethany becomes more grounded and empathetic. The film leans heavily into comedy and action, with Dwayne Johnson delivering reliable heroics, Kevin Hart and Jack Black providing steady laughs, and Karen Gillan bringing both toughness and humor to her role, though her costume did spark some debate. While the plot can feel uneven at times and the danger could have been pushed further, the visual effects hold up well, and the set pieces, especially the animal stampede and the helicopter chase, are memorable. As a standalone sequel that respectfully nods to the original and honors Robin Williams' legacy, Welcome to the Jungle succeeds as light, family-friendly entertainment. It's predictable, sure, but its message about self-acceptance and personal growth lands. In the end, it delivers exactly what it promises: a fun, fast-paced adventure full of laughs, action, and old-school escapism. The story kicks off with 4 very different high schoolers landing in detention, where they stumble across an old video game that unexpectedly sucks them into its digital world. Inside, they meet a guide who lays out the rules. To escape, they need to complete a quest by returning a stolen gem to its rightful place. Survival hinges on learning to use their new abilities, compensating for their weaknesses, and above all working together. Each character gets 3 lives, but no one's entirely sure what happens once those run out, and the assumption that it might mean real death keeps the tension high throughout. I never saw the original Jumanji, but this reboot caught my attention thanks to its fun premise and a cast I've enjoyed elsewhere. In an odd way, it reminded me of The Breakfast Club, and not just because of the detention setup, but because it slowly peels back the characters' stereotypes. People who initially seem one-dimensional get thrown into avatars that are the complete opposite of who they are, which becomes a clever vehicle for exploring insecurity, confidence, and growth. The cast is clearly having a blast, and it shows. Dwayne Johnson is especially entertaining as a hero who looks unstoppable but is secretly riddled with anxiety. Jack Black steals scene after scene playing a teenage girl trapped in a middle-aged man's body, and the performance is played for laughs without ever turning mean-spirited. Kevin Hart and Karen Gillan also shine, balancing comedy with genuinely solid character beats. From an action standpoint, the film delivers exactly what it promises: a convincing CGI, energetic set pieces, and lush Hawaiian scenery that sells the danger of the world beautifully. The villain is thin, but that actually works within the logic of the story, since this is a video game and its NPCs are intentionally limited and repetitive for comedic effect. What really elevates the film is how well it understands video game logic. From visible life counters to explanatory cutscenes, it leans into gaming mechanics instead of shying away from them. The mystery of what happens after a character's final life is lost never feels like a plot hole. Instead, it adds real suspense for both the characters and the audience. Director Jake Kasdan isn't known for big blockbuster spectacle, but his strength lies in comedy and character work, and that's exactly where the film succeeds most. The action is competent without being groundbreaking, but the performances and humor carry the load. The film also plays cleverly with audience expectations by flipping the usual personas of its stars, letting them stretch in unexpected directions. The plot doesn't offer many surprises, but it doesn't really need to. The mix of adventure, humor, and likable characters keeps things moving at a satisfying pace. Even potentially risky jokes, like a teenager adjusting to life in a completely different body, are handled with enough care to avoid crossing into offensive territory. Overall, this turned out to be a pleasant surprise. What could have been a forgettable remake instead becomes a genuinely entertaining adventure. Fans of classic Indiana Jones-style action, or anyone hunting for a smart, funny crowd pleaser, should walk away satisfied. This movie works largely because the script is smarter than it needs to be. You can feel the effort that went into squeezing real humor and character development out of the premise, and for the most part, it pays off. The comedy comes not just from jokes, but from contrasting who these characters think they are versus who they become once thrown into chaos. Every major cast member gets something meaningful to work with, even if some arcs are more obvious than others. Still, the underlying message lands. Real growth comes from looking past surface-level labels and confronting the traits holding you back, whether that's selfishness, overconfidence, or plain arrogance. That said, the humor doesn't always hit with equal force. One character in particular gets stuck playing a single exaggerated note for much of the runtime, and while it's funny at first, it wears thin once the writing stops giving them anything new to do with it. Interestingly, another cast member usually known for loud, broad comedy ends up delivering sharper, more effective laughs here, maybe because the material suits them better, or because they lean into audience expectations more strategically. Midway through, a new character is introduced to raise the stakes, and while the addition makes narrative sense and ties nicely into the setup, the performance itself doesn't quite stand out against the rest of the ensemble, though that might say more about how strong the core cast already is than about any real weakness. The film has its share of logic gaps as certain game mechanics get introduced and then never really revisited, which might frustrate anyone who thinks too hard about the rules. The action sequences are competently staged but rarely memorable, serving the story rather than elevating it. Nothing visually groundbreaking here, but nothing that falls flat either. Still, what makes the movie enjoyable is the clear sense that everyone involved actually cares. The performances feel engaged, the dialogue has intention, and the characters evolve believably within the bounds of a family-friendly adventure. If the trailer didn't completely turn you off and you like the cast, there's a good chance you'll walk away more entertained than expected. It's not a must-see blockbuster, but it's a solid, light watch for when you want something fun without demanding much of you. The story follows four high schoolers stuck in detention who stumble on an old video game hidden away in school storage. Once they start playing, they're pulled into the game's world and transformed into wildly different avatars. The shy brainiac becomes a fearless action hero, the cocky athlete shrinks into a pint-sized sidekick, the self-absorbed popular girl finds herself trapped in the body of a middle-aged male academic, and the quiet overachiever becomes a confident, highly skilled fighter. To escape, they have to finish the game, but with a limited number of lives. Every mistake carries a cost. As someone who enjoyed the original years ago, I went in wary of how a modern revival might affect its legacy. Thankfully, this entry doesn't try to replicate the past instead of magical chaos spilling into the real world. It embraces a fast-paced, video game-inspired structure that leans harder into comedy than suspense. The humor, drawn from the clash between the characters' real personalities and their in-game avatars, is consistently effective, and the film clearly has fun poking at gaming tropes along the way. The cast fully commits to the absurdity, and while some performances are intentionally over the top, the tone calls for it. One standout moment to an awkward attempt at flirtation perfectly captures the film's willingness to laugh at discomfort instead of shying away from it. Even the more cartoonish CGI feels appropriate given the digital setting. This is ultimately popcorn entertainment, predictable, occasionally messy, but far more enjoyable than expected. It may not reach greatness, but it's confident, self-aware, and surprisingly thoughtful beneath the jokes are more than enough for a modern reimagining of a beloved property. Welcome to the Jungle wisely avoids leaning too hard on easy nostalgia or constantly reminding viewers it's following a beloved 90s classic. Rather than endlessly referencing the Robin Williams film, it builds its own identity, borrowing more from modern action comedies than from the whimsical tone of the original Jumanji. Whether that works depends largely on what you expect going in. This sequel moves even further from Chris Van Allsburg's original book, keeping just enough nods to justify the connection and lure longtime fans back into the jungle. One of the biggest changes is the nature of the game itself, and no longer a dusty board game. Jumanji has evolved into a video game to suit a new generation of players. That update initially risked stripping away the magic that defined the original, but the film smartly frames the shift by presenting Jumanji as a game that constantly reinvents itself in order to stay playable. The movie is clearly split into two halves: the real world, where we meet the characters as ordinary teenagers, and the game world, where they reappear as exaggerated avatars with unique abilities and weaknesses. Director Jake Kasdan wastes no time introducing the four leads, sketching out their personalities and flaws with a brisk, playful rhythm reminiscent of classic teen films like The Breakfast Club and Mean Girls. Their detention mishap leads straight into the updated Jumanji, and once they've chosen avatars, everything changes. Inside the game, each character has to confront a version of themselves that challenges how they see their place in the world. The central conflict to defeating the villainous Van Pelt, played by Bobby Cannavale, is arguably the film's weakest element. He's a fairly forgettable antagonist who ends up feeling more like an accidental parody than a real threat. Still, the focus clearly isn't on the villain but on the journey and the character dynamics. Unlike the original, which brought the jungle into reality, this sequel keeps almost all the action within Jumanji itself. That choice preserves a sense of originality and lets the film further explore the world Alan Parrish once survived, while quietly honoring both the character and Robin Williams with a respectful musical cue. At its core, Welcome to the Jungle functions as a tribute not through imitation but through spirit. One of the script's smartest choices is flipping character roles for comedic effect. The shy, awkward teens become confident, powerful heroes like Dr. Smolder Bravestone, Dwayne Johnson, and Ruby Roundhouse, Karen Gillan, while the popular kids get stuck with far less glamorous avatars. This body swap mechanic gives the cast room to play, and most of the early jokes land well. Johnson reacting to his own exaggerated physique is amusing, but Jack Black is the undeniable standout. Playing a teenage girl trapped in a middle-aged man's body, Black delivers sharp physical comedy and exaggerated mannerisms that never feel forced. He walks a line that could easily have become uncomfortable and somehow avoids crossing it, earning some of the film's biggest laughs. The humor overall is a bit uneven. The Johnson-Hart pairing leans heavily on familiar territory-sized jokes, frantic yelling, crude humor, and while it's serviceable, it's arguably the least inventive part of the comedy. Gillan's character adds a more thoughtful layer. Her frustration with her avatar's revealing outfit evolves into a subtle critique of how women are often sexualized in games and media, echoing characters like Lara Croft. Gillan balances humor, confidence, and self-awareness with real ease, proving she can handle both action and comedy equally well. Overall, Welcome to the Jungle doesn't quite replicate the magic of the original, but it succeeds by carving out its own space in a modern, character-driven adventure that respects its roots without being trapped by them. While the film leans heavily into comedy, it often does so at the expense of strong action. When it does attempt large-scale set pieces, they rarely leave a lasting impression. Explosions, chases, and combat exist, but mostly as background noise rather than standout moments. Fans of the original, especially those who appreciated the tension Joe Johnston crafted, might walk away underwhelmed. This new version trades suspense for a lighter, more playful adventure that prioritizes humor above everything else. The missions inside the game world feel loosely constructed, and the narrative itself is fairly disposable, moving toward a predictable, formula-driven conclusion. The limited lives and character ability mechanics feel more administrative than dramatic, and the villain, portrayed without much enthusiasm, is thinly written. Much of his backstory delivered awkwardly through cutscenes rather than meaningful interaction. That said, predictability isn't entirely a flaw here. The story does exactly what it sets out to do: move its characters from point A to point B without much complication. The film embraces the absurdity of its premise: teenagers trapped in a video game and never pretends to take itself seriously. That self-awareness works in its favor, especially when the script pokes fun at familiar gaming tropes: expository NPC dialogue, clunky cutscene transitions, exaggerated stat screens, all used cleverly to generate laughs and poke fun at gaming culture. Still, the film stumbles in a few areas. The antagonist lacks depth or motivation beyond a generic hunger for power. A lot of jokes get recycled too often, wearing the humor thin. The script also tends to over-explain simple plot points, underestimating how well the audience can follow along. In the back half, unnecessary detours and thinly justified challenges start piling up, slowing the pace, and the emotional beats feel rushed and undercooked. The relationships between characters rarely evolve much past surface-level bonding, which becomes especially noticeable near the end, where the expected emotional payoff never quite lands. For a lot of viewers, Jumanji is a nostalgic piece of childhood, and while this reboot aims to introduce the franchise to a new generation, it keeps very little from the original beyond the name, the core concept, and a few familiar creatures. Even so, it manages to be an unexpectedly enjoyable ride, energetic, funny, and packed with clever nods to both the original film and modern gaming culture. Under Jake Kasdan's direction, the action, though not groundbreaking, is competently staged and entertaining. Did the movie need to use the Jumanji name to succeed? Not really. In doing so, it abandons the darker tone and subtle dread that defined the original game. Instead of fearing Jumanji, audiences are invited to imagine themselves inside it, stronger, braver, superhuman. The dangers feel toned down, making the adventure more approachable but noticeably less intense. By consistently choosing the simplest path through its conflicts, the film never reaches the cultural impact of its predecessor. It's light entertainment, clearly designed as a fun distraction rather than a lasting classic, and at times it shows a lack of faith in its audience's intelligence. Still, the cast elevates the material considerably. Dwayne Johnson gives a refreshingly self-aware performance, poking fun at his own larger-than-life image with deadpan commitment. Jack Black steals the show with an outrageous turn that pushes the body swap comedy to its limits, and Kevin Hart and Karen Gillan round out the cast with solid comedic energy that makes the ridiculous premise genuinely engaging. In the end, Welcome to the Jungle is a glossy, joke-filled adventure that doesn't aim high but succeeds at being entertaining. It won't redefine the franchise, but it offers enough laughs and charm to justify the trip. Each character enters the game armed with specific abilities meant to help them survive a wild scavenger hunt-style quest, and just how long the adventure lasts is left entirely to chance and a little luck. This sequel, written by Chris McKenna, Eric Sommers, Scott Rosenberg, and Jeff Pinkner, cleverly ties back to Joe Johnston's 1995 original while reshaping the concept for an audience raised on consoles rather than board games. The result is a high-energy, over-the-top ride that fully embraces its own absurdity. From the opening scene to the last show, logic isn't exactly welcome at this party, but momentum never falters. The movie barrels forward with relentless enthusiasm, turning its far-fetched premise into a strength rather than a flaw. Like the Robin Williams original, the story begins in the real world before plunging into fantasy, though this time the focus shifts heavily toward four modern high schoolers who become the emotional heart of the story. Visually, the film benefits from vastly improved CGI, with action sequences that outshine the clunkier effects of the 1995 version, especially a memorable crocodile encounter. A clever twist even lets the characters bend mortality itself, giving death a temporary sting instead of a permanent end. The story picks up where the original left off, on the beach where the cursed board game was originally buried. A teenager finds it, unknowingly setting the next chapter in motion. Overnight, the game updates itself for the times, transforming into a video game console. Once it's powered on, it yanks the player straight out of reality and into a dangerous digital jungle. 2 decades later, we meet the core group: Spencer Gilpin, a nervous gamer caught plagiarizing for his football star friend Bethany Walker, a social media-obsessed student busted for texting during a test, and Martha Capley, a withdrawn teen who refuses to participate in gym class. All 4 end up in detention under the watchful eye of an unimpressed principal. What starts as a familiar teen movie setup quickly spirals into chaos. While cleaning out a storage room, the students find the strange console and decide to play, mistaking it for a generic fighting game. Instead of controlling avatars, they become them. Spencer transforms into the muscle-bound adventurous Mulder Bravestone. Fridge is shocked to find himself in the diminutive body of zoologist Mouse Finbar. Bethany's worst nightmare comes true as she wakes up as the middle-aged Professor Sheldon Oberon, while Martha blossoms into the confident, lethal Ruby Roundhouse, a martial arts expert with plenty of style. While the sequel honors the spirit of the original, it diverges in key ways. The 1995 film followed a single child trapped in the game, later pursued by a villainous hunter after escaping. It leaned into chaos, spilling out into suburbia. This new version widens the scope by forcing teamwork inside the game itself. The characters, dropped dramatically into the jungle, quickly discover tattoo-style life counters on their wrists. A death is possible but not permanent, adding both tension and comedy as the characters repeatedly test their limits. What really elevates Welcome to the Jungle is its cast of likable, well-defined heroes. Each avatar reflects the insecurities and flaws of the teenager controlling it, creating comedy that's rooted in character rather than pure slapstick. Watching a fearless-looking hero panic at the first sign of danger is endlessly funny once you remember who's actually behind the wheel. Scenes like Bethany awkwardly coaching Ruby through a flirting lesson stand out as genuine highlights, proof the script gives everyone a real moment to shine. By the time the credits roll, it's clear this is more than just a sequel. It feels like a full reinvention of the franchise. With a global box office haul approaching $900 million against a modest budget, the film's success all but guarantees Jumanji isn't done rolling the dice anytime soon. This one genuinely caught me off guard. My expectations were rock bottom going in. I'd seen the 1995 original years earlier and thought it was fine, nothing special. And I've never been especially fond of Robin Williams' style, which didn't help. Finding out Dwayne Johnson was starring didn't exactly boost my excitement either, since he isn't one of my favorite actors. So overall, I braced myself for something thoroughly average. The opening didn't do much to change my mind, especially the introduction of the phone-obsessed teen character, who I initially found pretty grating. But once the group gets pulled into the game world, everything shifts in a genuinely good way. The smartest move the film makes is flipping the teenagers' personalities once they become their adult avatars. Watching Johnson play the awkward, insecure nerd Spencer, Kevin Hart portray a former star athlete now trapped in a tiny body, Jack Black embody a shallow popular girl, and Karen Gillan transform into a fearless action hero is where the movie truly shines. The comedy works because mentally, they're all still teenagers struggling to process bizarre new bodies and abilities, and watching them figure out what they can and can't do never stops being entertaining. The joke never wears out. It's welcome across the whole runtime. Beyond the humor, The story itself is genuinely engaging. The plot moves at a steady clip, the visual effects impress, and the adventure elements feel polished. It's rare for me to say this, but this sequel easily outdoes the original, and not because it's some cinematic masterpiece, but because it blew past my expectations by such a wide margin. For me, it's one of the year's biggest surprises. While scrolling through 2017 releases, I noticed how much Dwayne Johnson had stood out in recent action franchises and remembered how strong Karen Gillan was in Oculus. With this being one of the last UK releases still playing in theaters that year, it felt like the right time to finally check it out. From a creative standpoint, the writers take the classic board game premise and cleverly modernize it into a video game. The script pokes fun at gaming trope as a repetitive NPC dialogue, obvious mission objectives while still embracing them wholeheartedly, and that self-aware humor helps it rise above most video game adaptations. Rather than getting bogged down in heavy mythology, the story keeps things simple, letting the action, character dynamics, and comedy takes center stage. Every challenge highlights how each character contributes something the team needs. Director Jake Kasdan, following in his father's adventurous footsteps, makes excellent use of Hawaii's jungle scenery to build a claustrophobic, high-stakes game environment. To every level feels dangerous, every checkpoint hints at another looming threat, and the action is shot clearly enough that you can actually enjoy each stunt and finishing move. Performance-wise, Dwayne Johnson delivers a strong mix of action hero confidence and sarcastic humor as Spencer's avatar. Kevin Hart and Jack Black bounce off each other brilliantly, and Karen Gillan clearly relishes playing Ruby Roundhouse, balancing physical combat with sharp, understated one-liners. Together, the cast makes the jungle feel alive and unpredictable. Like a lot of viewers, I wasn't a huge fan of the original, but this update worked far better for me, as shifting the chaos from the real world into a structured game setting made the adventure feel more coherent and enjoyable. The movie strikes a near-perfect balance between comedy and action, tilting just slightly toward laughs. The cast does an excellent job capturing the personalities of the teenagers behind each avatar, which drives much of the humor. The setup is simple but effective. A mysterious game gets discovered, transforms overnight into a console game, and years later pulls 4 very different teens into its world. The nerd becomes a fearless explorer, the athlete turns into a reluctant sidekick, and the popular girl and the shy outsider land in completely unexpected roles. In the end, while it might not be the best movie of the year, it's a fun, energetic adventure that succeeds by being smarter and more entertaining than anyone expected. What starts as a typical high school setup quickly flips on its head once 4 very different teens get pulled into a video game version of Jumanji. Inside, roles are hilariously reversed. The shy, awkward girl becomes a stunning, highly skilled action heroine, while the confident, popular girl ends up trapped in the body of an overweight, middle-aged professor who specializes in maps. Along with their teammates, they're tasked with returning a mysterious jewel to its rightful place, all while navigating limited lives, dangerous jungles, hostile creatures, and a villain standing in their way. The movie leans heavily on its cast, and that's honestly where it succeeds most. Without these performances, this could easily have been just another forgettable jungle adventure. Dwayne Johnson once again proves why he's the most successful wrestler turned actor working today, convincingly playing a massive powerhouse who's secretly insecure and terrified. Karen Gillan shines by balancing physical confidence with social awkwardness, making her character both funny and genuinely charming. Kevin Hart delivers exactly what you'd expect: a fast-talking humor and non-stop energy, but the real standout is Jack Black. His portrayal of the self-absorbed popular girl stuck in a completely different body is so committed it genuinely feels like he is that character. The villain, unfortunately, is where the film stumbles. He never feels particularly threatening and mostly exists to move the plot along. While I enjoyed the film overall, there were moments where it tried to take itself a bit too seriously, and the runtime felt slightly longer than it needed to be. Still, those issues didn't stop it from being a genuinely fun experience. I never cared much for the original, but this sequel worked far better for me. I see it less as a reboot and more as a continuation with a modern twist, since the game itself has evolved over time. Even though most of the film focuses on the in-game avatars, the actors playing the real-world teenagers held their own and felt believable too. At its core, this film blends action and comedy but leans more toward comedy, and that made for a refreshing change of pace here, an enjoyable watch for multiple generations. I saw it with my parents, and they had a great time too. Compared to the original, which I mostly remember for Robin Williams and its darker, slightly unsettling tone, this entry keeps things lighter and focuses more on character interaction than fear. Some of the modern updates, particularly jokes about social media and body image, here didn't always land and occasionally felt forced. The game mechanics don't hold up to much scrutiny either, and the curse and villain plot doesn't carry much real weight. That said, the cast's chemistry carries the movie. It sometimes feels like a missed opportunity for Dwayne Johnson, but Karen Gillan's screen presence alone adds real entertainment value. In the end, it's a fun, crowd-pleasing movie that knows exactly what it wants to be. Nothing groundbreaking, but an enjoyable ride nonetheless. And honestly, I couldn't help but laugh at the missed opportunity of nobody using their future knowledge after escaping the game. You just imagine how different things could have been if someone had come back and invested early in Bitcoin. There are clearly stakes at play here, but because most of the characters are fairly flat and not especially compelling, the emotional investment never runs particularly deep. Still, what gives the film its spark is the contrast between who these characters are in real life and who they're forced to become inside the game. Here, that disconnect adds charm and keeps things from feeling stale. At the end of the day, Welcome to the Jungle delivers exactly what it promises: a breezy, entertaining, crowd-pleasing adventure. It doesn't reach for grandeur or emotional heaviness, and that self-awareness is part of why it works. So the film knows its limits, never takes itself too seriously, and fully commits to being a light-hearted ride. Given my fairly low expectations going in, I was pleasantly surprised. This blockbuster turned out to be far more enjoyable than it had any business being. Late sequels arriving years after the original often struggle to connect with modern audience, so the original fans have moved on, and newer viewers lack the nostalgia. History hasn't been kind to these follow-ups. Basic Instinct to anyone. Against that backdrop, this film's success is impressive, especially given that it manages to stand on its own without Robin Williams, whose performance defined so much of the original. The premise has been smartly updated for a new generation. Instead of a magical board game, the story now revolves around a video game, an understandable shift, considering how few kids today would willingly sit down with dice and a board, though some of us still swear by Monopoly. When four high schoolers land in detention and discover an old gaming console in a dusty school basement, curiosity gets the better of them. Naturally, they decide to play, because nothing bad ever happens when teenagers kill time that way, right? The opening stretch focuses on establishing the teens and their personalities. But once the game begins, everything changes. Each student transforms into an in-game avatar, older, stronger, more confident, equipped with specific skills, and from that point on, we spend most of the movie in their adult forms. And when one of those forms looks like Dwayne Johnson, that's hardly a downside. What follows is a fairly familiar setup: heroes dropped into a jungle world ruled by a villainous force, tasked with saving the land and surviving the game. On paper, it's standard action fare, but the film elevates the formula by embracing video game logic and poking fun at it relentlessly. Extra lives, bottomless backpacks, arbitrary strengths and weaknesses, so it's all there, and the film has a genuinely good time calling attention to these tropes. Still, flashy action and clever gags wouldn't mean much without strong performances. The adult cast deserves real credit here. They're not just playing heroes, they're playing teenagers playing heroes who are themselves exaggerated game characters. That's a tricky balancing act, and it mostly works thanks to the cast's commitment. Dwayne Johnson is reliably charismatic, but the real standout is Jack Black, who plays a teenage girl trapped in a middle-aged man's body. It sounds ridiculous because it is, but his performance is pitch perfect and often hilarious, stealing scenes with ease. Surprisingly, the film also makes room for real character growth. Beneath the jokes and action, the teens go through genuinely meaningful changes, emerging as better versions of themselves by the end. It's not deep, but it's sincere in more than you might expect from a movie built around game mechanics. If you're just looking for a turn-your-brain-off action comedy, this delivers. But if you're a gamer, there's an extra layer of enjoyment in watching so many familiar tropes lovingly teased. And one last nod to the ending: instead of going with the obvious, expected choice, the writers opted for something more grounded and realistic. That small decision earned genuine respect from me, and a few bonus points. As a modern follow-up to the 1995 adventure classic, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle may not capture the timeless magic of the original, but it delivers exactly what it promises: fast-paced fun, colorful action, and plenty of laughs. Built as a family-friendly holiday crowd-pleaser, it succeeds more often than not, making it a solid pick for a relaxed weekend watch. The story follows four high schoolers who accidentally get pulled into the world of Jumanji, this time reimagined as a video game. Inside, they're transformed into wildly different avatars and have to complete the mission to escape back to reality. The film smartly takes its time establishing who these teenagers actually are before the adventure kicks off, and that groundwork pays off once the game starts. So watching their real personalities clash with their in-game identities becomes one of the film's biggest strengths. Casting is where the movie truly shines. Dwayne Johnson plays against his usual tough guy image, portraying a powerful avatar who's ironically terrified of almost everything, and his charm and comedic timing keep improving with every film. Here he proves once again he's more than just muscle. Kevin Hart, often hit or miss for some viewers, is surprisingly effective, delivering sharp one-liners and physical comedy that land more often than expected. Karen Gillan brings both style and strength to her role, handling the action sequences with real confidence and adding humor through her character's self-aware moments. Her fight scenes are energetic, and she holds her own alongside her co-stars. Nick Jonas makes a likable impression as well, while the teenage actors outside the game give the story its emotional grounding. But the true standout is Jack Black playing a teenage girl trapped in an adult male avatar. He fully commits with impeccable comedic instincts, from his exaggerated body language to his priceless reactions to his character's physical changes. It's a reminder of just how skilled he is at character-driven comedy, and he earns the loudest laughs in the film. From a technical standpoint, the movie moves at a brisk pace once it gets going. The action is clean and easy to follow, the visuals are bright and appealing for younger audiences, and the video game mechanics are like multiple lives per character, add a clever layer to the storytelling without overcomplicating things. Importantly, the film doesn't waste time once the setup is complete, avoiding the common trap of dragging out the transition into the fantasy world. It isn't without flaws. The villain is fairly generic and lacks depth, serving more as an obstacle than a memorable antagonist. But given the movie's light-hearted, family-oriented goals, that shortcoming is easy to forgive. Ultimately, Welcome to the Jungle works because it doesn't try to outdo or replace the original. Instead, it respects what came before while updating the concept for a new generation. With confident direction, lively performances, and a clear sense of its audience, the film delivers a genuinely enjoyable experience. If you're after a laugh-filled adventure that doesn't take itself too seriously, this one's worth the trip. Reinventing Jumanji as a video game turns out to be a smart, surprisingly effective movie. That single change instantly explains the modern tone, the fast-paced humor, and the game-style rules driving the story forward. The body-switching mechanic isn't just a gimmick. Either it becomes the engine for both comedy and character development. Each teenager enters the game carrying their own flaws, insecurities, or inflated egos, and the avatars they're forced to inhabit push them to confront those issues in entertaining, often heartfelt ways. The cast is a major reason the film works as well as it does. Dwayne Johnson, Kevin Hart, Jack Black, and Karen Gillan fully embrace the ridiculousness of the premise, and that commitment elevates every scene. Jack Black stands out in particular, delivering a performance that balances humor with genuine warmth. His portrayal avoids cheap jokes and instead becomes one of the film's emotional centers, which isn't something many people would have expected going in. The direction keeps the story moving at a steady, engaging pace. The action is easy to follow and energetic without becoming exhausting, and the comedy stays consistently effective without drowning out the narrative. The jungle environment feels colorful and adventurous, giving the film that classic blockbuster atmosphere while still leaning into its comedic identity. What really sets Welcome to the Jungle apart is its sense of balance. It doesn't mock the original or try to replace it, and it never takes itself too seriously either. The film knows exactly what it is: a light-hearted, accessible adventure with heart, and that self-awareness is something a lot of modern reboots struggle to achieve. It respects its legacy without being chained to it. In the end, the movie succeeds because it justifies its own existence. It's funny, well-cast, cleverly written, and genuinely enjoyable. Rather than fading into the background as another unnecessary remake, it lays the groundwork for a new franchise that feels confident on its own terms. It surprised audiences in the best way and proved that revisiting a classic doesn't have to mean simply repeating it. Bringing the iconic Jungle board game into the 21st century actually makes a lot of sense. Traditional board games don't dominate pop culture the way they once did, while video games are everywhere. So when the mysterious game gets discovered and dismissed with the line "nobody plays board games anymore," its transformation into a video game cartridge feels like a natural evolution, the film's way of staying relevant in a modern world. The story centers on four familiar high school archetypes of the nerd, the athlete, the popular girl, the socially awkward outsider. But once they're pulled into the game, those labels get flipped on their heads. The quiet nerd becomes a fearless, muscular leader. The jock turns into a cautious zoologist weighed down by a backpack. And one of the girls ends up inhabiting the body of a middle-aged man, played fittingly by Jack Black. The humor generated by these role reversals is a constant source of entertainment. The film clearly borrows from classic adventure stories like Indiana Jones, much as the original Jumanji did. But that inspiration doesn't hurt it. Our adventure tales have been recycling similar ideas since long before cinema existed, and what matters is execution. Even if the plot isn't groundbreaking, the movie is undeniably fun. It works for both kids and adults, mixing broad, physical jokes with subtler humor tied to identity and self-awareness. Beneath the action and comedy, there's a clear message about teamwork and personal growth. And it's the kind of adventure where you can relax, enjoy the ride, and not overthink every detail. Dwayne Johnson deserves special mention for playing a socially awkward teen trapped inside the body of a classic Hollywood action hero. That contrast adds another layer of comedy and charm, rounding out a movie that's far more entertaining than it has any right to be. When I first sat down to watch this, I was almost certain I'd hate it. Honestly, who thought turning a beloved classic into a reboot and a video game, no lesser, was a good idea? The cast announcement didn't win me over either. with the exception of Karen Gillan, who I've always liked. The rest of the lineup felt like actors who often play exaggerated versions of themselves. But here's the thing: instead of fighting their public personas, the cast leaned straight into them, and watching the leads poke fun at their own egos and perceived flaws turned out to be one of the film's biggest strengths. I genuinely can't picture different actors pulling these roles off quite the same way. The self-awareness gives the film a playful edge that carries it through. In some respects, this version even improves on the original. The visual effects are far more impressive, and the story smartly keeps the audience inside the game world rather than letting the chaos spill out into reality. That said, none of this would exist without the groundwork laid by the original, and its influence is felt throughout. The film knows when to pay respect and when to move forward. I also really enjoyed the video game references sprinkled through, how too obvious enough to be fun, but not so deep they alienate anyone who didn't grow up gaming. Even someone like me could spot them, and they added a lot to the overall entertainment. It's an easy, enjoyable watch, just as accessible as the original, and I suspect it'll age fairly well. One surprisingly effective touch was the music choice. Hearing "Baby, I Love Your Way" show up felt oddly perfect, fitting the tone in a way I never would have predicted. The film balances action, comedy, a dash of romance, and a generally upbeat, feel-good atmosphere. I do have some reservations about how quickly a follow-up got greenlit. I'm going in with guarded expectations and wouldn't be shocked if it disappoints, but part of me is also hoping to be pleasantly surprised again. Credit where it's due, though. This movie makes it clear midway through that it's a sequel, not a remake, and that distinction matters. I'm beyond tired of pointless reboots, so that was a welcome relief. With a strong cast clearly giving it their all, the movie is still very much a typical big-budget Hollywood production, of flashy, loud, and fairly predictable, checking most of the familiar genre boxes. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It looks great and moves at a good pace, but it also means it lacks a truly distinctive identity of its own. The story follows 4 teens pulled into the game world, this time reimagined as a video game rather than a board game. The comedy is hit or miss, but there are plenty of solid laughs. Gillan is a standout, and Jack Black reminds us why he was so popular in the first place, in a way I hadn't felt in years. While I still prefer the original, this sequel absolutely exceeded my expectations, mostly because I went in expecting her and maybe even wanting her to dislike it. It's not groundbreaking, and it prioritizes spectacle over depth, but it's far from terrible. You could do much worse, and there's genuine fun to be had. The good, all 4 leads commit fully and deliver strong performances, and the lives mechanic is a clever addition. The bad, the villain feels oddly off from what I expected, and certain casting choices didn't land for me. What I learned: Jack Black fully commits no matter how ridiculous the role. At the end of the day, it's probably the most enjoyable video game-style movie out there. Not that the competition is especially fierce. What earns it that title is its self-awareness, energy, and cast chemistry rather than lazily recycling the past. It manages to honor the original while standing on its own. Like a lot of people, I was skeptical for years about whether revisiting this world was even necessary. But against my better judgment, it worked not perfectly, but well enough to win me over. The filmmakers managed to refresh the concept without tearing it down completely. Swapping the classic board game for a video game initially feels like a shortcut, but it turns out to be the smartest creative move the series could have made, opening the door to far more possibilities going forward. Possibilities the sequel fully takes advantage of. With a strong ensemble, non-stop momentum, and a surprising amount of heart, the film proves that evolution can work when it's handled carefully. Simply put, this sequel outperforms the 1995 original in several key ways. One of the biggest improvements is its emotional consistency. While the original bounced unpredictably between comedy, horror, and drama, this film maintains a clearer tone throughout. The humor also feels more layered and intentional, leaning into clever role reversals and solid writing rather than relying heavily on a single standout performance. Karen Gillan, once again, deserves particular praise for her dual performance, convincingly balancing her in-game persona with the awkward, introverted teenager behind the avatar. Most of the film's shortcomings are minor: an over-the-top motorcycle sequence, a few moments involving rhinos that stretch believability, and some of the coming-of-age beats feel slightly rushed, brushing the surface rather than fully landing. Still, these issues do little to detract from the overall experience. The movie shines in how it handles video game mechanics or special abilities, limited livers are using them in fun, inventive ways. Its pacing stays energetic, the action sequences are engaging, and the underlying human themes give the spectacle some emotional weight. Altogether, the performances, humor, and storytelling combine into a thoroughly entertaining ride. As a continuation of the original concept, Welcome to the Jungle succeeds by expanding the idea rather than simply copying it. The story follows four teenagers pulled into a video game world, and their adventure is both exciting and genuinely funny. The cast fully commits to their roles, each performance feeling distinct from what audiences might expect, which adds to the fun. Watching these characters navigate unfamiliar bodies and personalities is a big part of the film's charm. The only major letdown is the villain, who feels underdeveloped and lacking in presence. The actor does a capable job, but the character is given very little depth or motivation, making him far less memorable than the heroes. Despite that, this reboot is an unexpected treat, a playful, self-aware, and clearly made with real enthusiasm. What could have been a lazy remake instead becomes a lively reimagining that honors the original while carving out its own identity as a family-friendly adventure with plenty of laughs. It's easy to recommend and hard not to enjoy. I genuinely enjoyed the humor in this film. It actually landed for me. The jokes felt natural and well-timed rather than forced. I'll admit I was a bit annoyed at first that the story left the real world behind for a jungle setting instead of staying grounded, but once you accept that the characters have been pulled into an entirely different universe, the setting makes sense, and it never really became a deal-breaker for me. Before any of this, Jumanji started life as a children's book, followed by a family-friendly film adaptation. My memory of the original is a bit hazy, but I recall it centering on a classic American board game with a sense of adventure and danger that still felt fairly wholesome. Compared to that, this newer entry takes a very different approach. Some people might argue that sequels or reinterpretations risk damaging the original's legacy, but I don't fully agree. While I did have a few minor issues with how this universe's rules worked, that's not really why I watch movies like this in the first place. This isn't trying to be an emotional heavyweight like the earlier film. It's more about having fun, and honestly, it succeeds at that. Beneath the action and jokes, there's a surprisingly sweet message about self-confidence and personal growth. Watching a stereotypical jock, two socially awkward kids, said affectionately, and a self-absorbed social media addict slowly realize they're not as different as they assumed was genuinely charming. Visually, the movie looks fantastic. The action sequences are big, colorful, and exactly what you'd expect from this kind of adventure, and the set pieces balance excitement, comedy, and tension really well. One thing that initially threw me off was the idea of actors playing teenagers who are then playing entirely different characters inside the game. Thankfully, it didn't hurt the overall experience. Jack Black deserves special mention. His performance as a teenage girl trapped in a middle-aged man's body was surprisingly convincing, though the joke does get stretched a bit thin, especially during the flirting advice scenes. I also have mixed feelings about how closely the movie sticks to video game logic, constantly referencing stats, lives, and gameplay mechanics. Still, I actually like the idea of Jumanji evolving from a board game into a video game. It's a clever update, and it's slightly unsettling to imagine a game that can keep adapting itself to stay relevant forever. At times it felt like the NPCs existed purely as background decoration rather than real participants in the world, which pulled me out of the illusion a bit, though I chose to shrug that off rather than let it bother me too much. The setup mirrors the original in spirit. A group of kids finds an old game, starts playing, and ends up trapped inside it. This time, the twist is that they become the avatars they select. Spencer, a socially awkward kid in real life, ends up as Dr. Smolder Bravestone, a hyper-confident action hero with strength, speed, and almost no weakness. Honestly, who wouldn't want that upgrade? I'm an adult, and I'd still take that deal. Not everyone's so lucky. A tall high school athlete suddenly finds himself as a much shorter sidekick whose main skill is carrying gear. Then there's Bethany, a popular but shallow teen who ends up stuck in the body of a middle-aged man. Easily one of the movie's funniest concepts. The chemistry between the cast really carries the film. This was the second time Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart teamed up, and while their earlier collaboration was entertaining, this movie suits them far better. Add in strong support from Jack Black, Karen Gillan, and Nick Jonas, and you've got a cast that clearly understands the tone the movie is going for. All told, this version of Jumanji may not replace the original for everyone, but it doesn't need to. It's a fun, visually impressive adventure that leans into humor and character growth rather than nostalgia alone. And that approach works in its favor. Some of the movie's biggest laughs come from watching Jack Black inhabit a teenage girl suddenly stuck in a male body, slowly realizing both the perks and the awkward downsides of being a guy. Karen Gillan's Ruby Roundhouse is another standout, clearly poking fun at how female characters are often designed in video games. So incredibly capable in combat, yet dressed in an outfit that makes no sense for survival. Her revealing costume becomes a recurring joke, especially since it makes her real-life counterpart, Martha, visibly uncomfortable. At its core, the film explores what it would actually be like to exist inside a video game. The characters treat every obstacle like a new level, constantly aware of the 3 lives they've been given and the danger of losing them. It's a fun concept, but it doesn't leave much room for deeper character growth. Each teen enters the game with personal issues that feel primed for exploration, but the story moves so quickly those arcs never fully develop into anything substantial. Instead, the movie leans heavily on its cast. Much of the enjoyment comes from watching Dwayne Johnson, Kevin Hart, and Jack Black bounce off one another as their avatars stumble through the game world. Their chemistry carries the film, and honestly, that alone makes it worth watching. The original 1995 Jumanji got mixed critical reactions despite being a massive box office hit. Like a lot of family films from that decade, it was loud, high concept, and packed with jokes that haven't aged particularly well. Given that, it's a little surprising not only that this movie exists decades later with no returning cast, but that it's actually entertaining in a refreshingly old-school way. As far as video game-based movies go, this is easily one of the best, embracing cheesy fun, heartfelt moments, and a sense of adventure that's become increasingly rare. The story follows 4 teenagers who stumble on an outdated gaming console only to be pulled into Jumanji's jungle world. Inside, they appear as completely different people, leading to plenty of body swap humor and fish out of water moments. While the comedy drives much of the film, the fantasy plot itself holds up surprisingly well, with video game mechanics shaping both the narrative and the jokes. One of the film's strongest qualities is its willingness to occasionally slow down and let the relationships and humor breathe. The casting is spot on, especially Johnson and Black, who do an impressive job mirroring the personalities of the teens controlling them. Kevin Hart may not fully match his character's real-world counterpart, but he still delivers plenty of laughs. Overall, the movie feels far more thoughtfully put together than expected. The action scenes are easy to follow and well-paced, the dialogue is sharp, and several comedic moments genuinely stand out, even against other films released that year. When the plot occasionally slips into predictable or forced territory, it's noticeable but never enough to derail the experience. In the end, This version of Jumanji works as a feel-good family adventure that just asks viewers to drop their cynicism and enjoy the ride. I was initially skeptical about this remake since I genuinely liked the original, but I have to admit the updated storyline mostly works. Some of the slapstick doesn't land, and the concept could have been pushed further, but the character interactions stay entertaining throughout. The visual effects impress, and the early twist of entering the game is fun, though once that novelty wears off, the movie loses a bit of momentum. The plot centers on 4 students serving detention who discover an old video game in their school's basement. After picking characters, they're pulled into the game world and transformed into their chosen avatars. A guide explains they need to recover a stolen artifact from a villain and return it to its rightful place in order to escape. Along the way, they meet another player who's been trapped in the game for decades, and together they attempt to finish the mission. Each character brings something different to the story, with Jack Black's turn as a teenage girl trapped in a grown man's body standing out as a particular highlight. Dwayne Johnson predictably plays the heroic leader, while Kevin Hart provides comic relief. Although the movie is undeniably entertaining, the humor feels a bit too safe at times, and several scenes stretch believability. Still, it's a fun, light-hearted adventure that delivers more than most remakes manage. With all that said, I'd happily watch this again. I respect that the director took a risk with a strong concept and tried something a little outside the box, even if the final result didn't fully live up to its potential. It's entertaining, but it could have been stronger. Overall verdict: watchable. Roundup: the film is directed by Jake Kasdan, a filmmaker whose background is firmly rooted in comedy. He's previously directed titles like Sex Tape and Bad Teacher, both starring Cameron Diaz, as well as Walk Hard, The Dewey Cox Story, The TV Set, Orange County, and Zero Effect. Given that track record, this project was clearly a step outside his usual comfort zone. On television, he's worked on shows including Freaks and Geeks, Grosse Pointe, Undeclared, Cracking Up, New Girl, and The Grinder, and he's also set to return to the Bad Teacher franchise, currently in development. As a modern remake, the film performed exceptionally well financially and helped cement Dwayne Johnson's status as one of Hollywood's most reliable box office draws. Still, despite its success, I personally find the original more charming, even though it earned a comparatively modest $263 million worldwide on a $65 million budget. This version, by contrast, reportedly cost around $90 million and went on to gross an impressive $957 million globally. If someone had told me they were making a Jumanji sequel, my first reaction would have been laughter, followed by a dramatic objection. And yet, here we are, and surprisingly, it actually works. Instead of repeating the board game idea, the film swaps it out for a retro video game from the mid-90s. 4 high schoolers get pulled into the game's world, where their mission is to return a magical jewel to the top of a jaguar-shaped mountain to save Jumanji. Thankfully, the filmmakers avoided simply copying the original and instead brought a contemporary spin, easily the sequel's biggest strength, especially in how it breaks down and pokes fun at video game mechanics. Growing up, I once dreamed of becoming a game developer and taught myself the basics of avatars, NPCs, levels, respawning, so seeing those elements play such a big role felt like a clever wink that genuinely made me smile. This reimagining leans far more into action and comedy, pushing the fantasy-heavy tone of the original into the background. The humor doesn't always land, and the CGI-heavy action can feel excessive at times, but I stayed engaged throughout. Jack Black is easily the standout performer, delivering some genuinely funny moments while playing a teenage girl trapped in a middle-aged man's body. Dwayne Johnson remains effortlessly likable, and the rest of the cast holds its own. That said, the film's character archetypes and its be whoever you want to be message feel pretty forced and overly familiar. Add in a straightforward plot, an unremarkable villain, and the odd absence of well-known pop songs, which might have worked better than the original score, and you end up with a movie that's good, but not great. Still, it's entertaining, and maybe that's exactly what audiences were looking for. I certainly didn't leave disappointed, and yes, I was absolutely waiting for that one particular song to play. As the film neared its eye-roll-inducing ending, I was starting to lose hope. But then the credits rolled and there it was, a satisfaction achieved. This version flips the original concept on its head. Instead of chaos spilling out into the real world, the characters get pulled into the game itself. Once inside Jumanji, the four teenagers take on their avatar forms and slowly come to terms with their new reality. Once the initial shock wears off, they discover each character has specific strengths and weaknesses, and that teamwork is the only way to survive and finish the game. The story itself isn't nearly as bad as it could have been, and it actually functions reasonably well as a loose continuation of the original. The game-like structure is one of its more successful aspects, complete with multiple lives per character and NPCs who repeat the same lines thanks to their limited programming. That attention to detail is handled surprisingly well. Ultimately, though, it's the performances that elevate the movie. Jack Black nearly steals the whole thing with his physical comedy and spot-on mannerisms, fully committing to the absurdity of the situation. Dwayne Johnson also shines, especially given the contrast between his avatar's confidence and the real-world insecurity of Spencer, the teenager controlling him. Kevin Hart brings his usual energy and comedic timing, while Karen Gillan delivers a strong, funny performance as a capable yet unexpectedly awkward action hero. In an era overloaded with remakes and soft reboots, I honestly didn't expect to say this, but a Jumanji sequel isn't such a terrible idea after all. The 1995 original already felt like it was teasing future adventure, so its ending practically invited sequels, and the premise itself, an unpredictable, dangerous game spilling into the real world, can support endless stories. On top of that, let's be honest, while the original is fondly remembered and carries plenty of nostalgia, it was never a flawless classic. It was fun, memorable, and imaginative, but there was definitely room to polish the concept and build on it. That's exactly where Welcome to the Jungle steps in. No, it doesn't completely outshine the original, but it comes impressively close. The movie keeps that playful, self-aware tone, modernizes the visuals, and reshapes the story just enough to feel fresh without losing its Jumanji identity. It still feels like part of the same world, just updated for a new generation. What really makes this version work, though, is the cast. The teenagers themselves are serviceable, even if their personalities are about as deep as an early-era video game character select screen. But once the story shifts into the game world, that's where the magic kicks in. Dwayne Johnson and Karen Gillan play near-invincible action heroes with total confidence, while Kevin Hart and Jack Black steal the spotlight as hilariously ineffective companions. The joke that these larger-than-life avatars are being controlled by awkward teenagers might sound cheap on paper, but it's a gag that keeps paying off, and Jack Black, in particular, shines as a popular, self-absorbed teen girl stuck in a grown man's body, his commitment to the role endlessly entertaining. That's really the perfect way to describe the film as a whole: unapologetically silly, occasionally crude, definitely leaning into easy laughs, but the right kind of silly. I do miss some of the darker moments and emotional weight of the original, and the portrayal of modern teenagers isn't exactly spot on. Still, the improved action sequences, more creative locations, and sheer fun factor make it hard to complain too much. This is the kind of movie you enjoy with popcorn in hand, a soda nearby, and zero expectations beyond having a good time. Just keep an eye out for hippos. The iconic pounding of drums echoes through the air once again, signaling danger just beyond the trees. Back in the 90s, those ominous beats were only one piece of what made Jumanji such a wild ride, and now, decades later, the jungle returns reimagined for a modern audience and clearly hoping to launch a new string of adventures. What worked, Nostalgic touches. The movie smartly sprinkles in references to the original without overdoing it. Our familiar jungle noises, animatronic-style creatures, and subtle nods to past characters help rekindle that old-school Jumanji charm and remind longtime fans where it all began. Performances. This isn't an awards season powerhouse, and it doesn't need to be. Dwayne Johnson delivers exactly what you'd expect: a heroic swagger mixed with surprisingly sharp comedic timing. Kevin Hart leans into his fast-talking, high-energy style, complete with a few well-placed expletives. Jack Black goes all in on awkward comedy, convincingly channeling teenage girl behavior right down to the smallest mannerisms. Karen Gillan balances toughness with restraint, crafting a fighter who isn't just driven by anger or angst. What stood out most was the chemistry between the cast, who it feels natural, effortless, and genuinely fun. Even more impressive is how well each actor manages to portray both their in-game persona and the teenager controlling them. That layered performance could easily have fallen flat, but instead it becomes one of the film's biggest strengths. And if there's one area where this movie truly excels, it's the comedy.